Boy, do I have a project for you guys tonight. This one here, not gonna lie, a little nervous about. I pulled my block apart while we're working on my brother's car. Figured I'd give it a little refresh. Some new rings, new bearings. Just do all that before I drop the new transmission in. And yeah, decided I was going to O-ring the block. I don't know what I was thinking, but here we are. So what I've got here is the Isky, however it's spelled, block O-ringing tool. Picked this up off of Summit Racing, has good reviews, and I did one test practice run on my brother's old block already, and seemed to go pretty good. So without further ado, we're going to do the real deal. So what you get in the box, I'll try to remove this gently. It's already kind of set in place here. This center bolt centers it in the hole. So you've got this tool with a carbide cutter on it, and it has these 4 pads around the outside edge that center the tool into the bore. And the idea is it self-centers. You set your height adjustment on your blade and give it a few spins, and cuts you a nice O-ring groove in your block, in a block that's already assembled. Normally you would do this on a mill at a machine shop with the block completely disassembled, but this is an afterthought, and other people have had good luck with it, so I figured I'd give it a shot too. Now, the reason I'm doing this, if I can find my old head gasket, is because on cylinder number 1, I don't know if you can see this nice egg shape here, but I started to blow the head gasket out. Now this is just a Felpro composite, $26 or whatever it was on Rock Auto. Been running these for years. They're great gaskets with proper techniques and the proper head studs, everything like that. These will hold an amazing amount of power, and they're a lot more forgiving than an MLS gasket. Now last year at some point, I don't know exactly when this happened, the car had no symptoms of a head gasket being blown. It wasn't pushing any coolant, wasn't mixing any oil or burning any oil or whatever. But it's clear as night and day there that this gasket was just about to push out. I don't know if it was the last time at the track or doing donuts in the snow. Who knows? I have no idea. But anyways, this got me thinking that I may be kind of pushing the boundaries of this gasket. And I didn't want to go through all the bother of resurfacing the block and the head and everything to get an MLS gasket to seal. I've tried it before and I pushed coolant. So back to a composite I went, and so now what I'm going to do is probably the next best thing, is we're going to put stainless steel O-rings in the block. Now I went ahead and blocked up a lot of the holes. Of course this thing is going to create some cuttings, and you need to set your depth for the cutter. Now you're going to be installing a stainless steel wire in the groove that it cuts that's 41 thousandths in diameter. And you want that wire to protrude from the surface 10 thousandths, so you have an interference with the head gasket which locks the fire ring in place and prevents it from blowing out. So in order to do that, read the instructions, and they suggest taking a 25 thousandths cut initially. So what I did is I took a feeler gauge, 25 thousandths, and I cut off little pieces of it. So I have 4 pieces of 25 thousandths feeler gauge, and you're going to set the tool in the block. You'll just snug the center pin up here, not too tight because you don't want it to bind in the bore, but you just want it snug, like just a little bit more. You want it snug where it has no side to side movement, but it still spins freely. And then what you do is you put one of these little pieces of 25 thousandths feeler gauge under each one of these little feet. And if I could find my Allen key, so I'll loosen this up. So now I'll just push the cutter down till it touches the block. Make sure it's nice and square against the holder. Snug this up. So now when I remove these 4 pieces of feeler gauge, this should give me a 25 thousandths cut. And once we complete that, I've got 4 more pieces of feeler gauge of 5 thousandths. So that'll give me my total of 30 thousandths of cut. Don't lose these unless you want to cut up another one of your feeler gauges. Luckily I had 2 of them. And I've already gone and set my distance from center. What I did, it's kind of hard to show now because I've already taken it off. You put the dowel pins in the block, put your head gasket on, and basically what you want to do is you'll loosen this bolt and adjust the center of the cutting tip so that it's right in the center of the fire ring of the head gasket. Now, that's what I was told, to try to get the groove as close to the center of the fire ring as possible. It's not very wide. So basically, you want the groove cut right in the center of this ring so that when you lock it all down, it kind of embosses itself into that fire ring and has nowhere to go. In theory, keeping everything locked right in place no matter how much boost you throw at it. And yeah, I started to push that copper O-ring there out too. This thing wasn't far from going. But that was about 42 pounds of boost on a composite gasket with L19 head studs. So I'll show you on the next hole how to get it centered up. It should be already correct. But anyway, so last thing before I start cutting this groove is you want to take some thick grease and pack it around the inside of your piston, just around the edge of the piston wall, so that the cuttings from the groove, and it does make quite a bit, and they're cast iron, really small. You want to pack it in around there so that all these little chips can't go down in around your piston and score the bore when it goes up and down. It's good old Walmart Super Tech. So you don't have to be fancy. You just want to pack it in all around the inside of the bore. So that way you can wipe out the grease later and take all the cuttings with it. And any little residue of grease that's left won't hurt anything. So there we go. Now the little filing shouldn't be able to get down in there, and I'm going to tape up my last 2 holes or 3 holes. I didn't do those earlier because I didn't want the tape to interfere with the feeler gauges. Make sure you don't put any tape where the O-ring cutter is going to ride, because that will affect the cutting depth. I'm going to stay just outside of that perimeter. I don't think I have to tell you to, double, triple, check everything, because you only get one shot at this. So now we're in. And I'm making sure the tape's not going to interfere with any of these little feet. We're snug in the bore. Basically, we just start turning clockwise. And we start scoring a groove in the block. Doesn't take much pressure. Try to go smooth with it. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult. I think sometimes it helps if you stand and over top of it. You can always back up a little bit and go again if it gets a little snug. It helped a lot too to take this motor mount off. It was on there, but the handle was interfering with the studs sticking out. So either take the mount off or remove the studs on a 2G anyways. 1G may be a different story. So it doesn't take very long, but you'll feel when it starts to bottom out. I may be putting 5 pounds of pressure on it. Not a lot. You want to let the tool do the cutting. And we're getting a nice little groove there. Eventually you'll get to a depth where the tool won't do any more cutting. See, I'm starting to get there now. Now the feet are starting to hold it up. It's getting easier in some places where it's cut to the depth. Eventually it's going to be like that everywhere. I probably should have taped a little bit further, but just keeping an eye, making sure none of the shavings are going over there. Into piston number 2. I don't think I've got anything in there. It's not a fast process, but it's not that long. we're getting there. It's not touching very much now. These handles tend to loosen off a little bit as you go around. One slight annoyance I've found with it, but it's not that bad. Almost there. Just a little high spot there. You can feel when the cutter is actually grabbing and cutting versus just sliding along. I think we're pretty well there. The sound changes too. Now the tool is just sort of riding in the groove. So, got that one, that initial step cut. You can see we've got a nice groove cut all the way around. You can see all these metal filings in the grease. Having a vacuum in the garage is actually very handy. So now we've got a 25 thousandths groove cut all the way around. So I'm going to put the tool back in the hole. Snug. You should line right back up in your groove. Perfect. So now we need to raise it up. So here are my 5 thousandths shims. Got a little bit of grease there. I'm going to wipe that off just so it doesn't interfere with anything. Line this up somewhere where your shims don't contact the tape or anything else. If you have to peel back some tape, then you have to peel back some tape. That's what I'm going to have to do here. I can put more tape. Try not to drop your shims. Alright, so now that all 4 5,000 shims are in place, we can go ahead and loosen the cutter and push it down to the bottom of that groove. Again, make sure you're square. You don't want the tool moving while it's cutting. Lock it down. Don't over tighten this. This is just aluminum, so you don't want to strip the threads out, because this tool is $308 roughly. So now we'll remove these 5/1000 shims. And keep them safe for the next hole. That's pretty much the same thing. We go back and cut another 5/1000 out. And if I was smart, I would have put my tape back. Luckily I haven't made much shavings yet. You caught me on that one. Getting ahead of myself. Now this pass shouldn't take very long. We're only removing 5/1000 versus 25/1000 the first time around. And again, you want to make sure this thing stays tight to the bore, because you don't want this to make the groove too wide. You've got a is it 1 or, yeah, I think it's 1 or 2 thousandths interference for the stainless steel wire, and that's what keeps it in place. Looks like we're pretty well there. So make sure it's cut all the way around. If you feel any resistance, it's because it's hitting a high spot. Just try to keep a nice square pressure down on the tool on all 4 of the feet. There we go. 1 O-ring groove done. And just be careful when you pick this out. These feet just sit in here and they will fall out if you tip it sideways. And there we have one nice 30/1000 O-ring groove cut in my block. So now I'm going to go ahead, do the rest of them, same process, and then I'll be back to show you how to install the wire. Now, before I forget about it, I'll show you how to set the cutter to be centered in the fire ring. So put your dowel pins in and set your head gasket on. This is a brand new Felpro 9627 PT, and so I sit it on there and raise your cutter up. Drop this down in the bore. in theory, all your bores should be the same diameter. In theory. But sometimes it's just a hair. So drop this down in the hole, being careful not to damage your gasket. And snug the cutter back up in the hole. So now we're centered to the bore. And see if I can get a better shot here. Now hopefully you can see the cutter here. We'll lower it down. So it's just about touching. I don't want to touch the fire ring, but close. And basically you're looking to see the end of that cutter right in the center of that fire ring. And it looks like my adjustment from the last hole is right on. Hopefully you can see that. And if it wasn't, I would loosen this bolt and adjust it so that the middle of the cutter is right in the middle of the fire ring. Yeah, that's about as best as I can get you a shot. But that cutter is right in the middle of that fire ring, so we know our distance from center is good. We want to be as close to center as possible to lock that fire ring in place. So once you've got that set, you can pull your tool back out, and we'll go through the same procedure as last time for setting our cutting depth. And earlier I mentioned how I use the grease to kind of catch all the crap from the cutter, and you see it leaves quite a bit. So what I've been doing is I just take a razor blade and slowly go around, and you're going to pick up all the crud that's stuck in the grease and just try not to push it down and around the piston. Wipe it off on a rag and just continue your way around, trying to keep the edge of the razor blade right on the edge of the piston. And you're going to get almost all of the grease out of the hole without getting anything down around the piston rings. Look at all those chunks. Can be a little tricky, especially when you're doing this in front of a camera, of course. Just take your time. Try not to scratch anything. Got all the way around the edge now. I'll just carefully use a rag around the center and in the fly cuts for the valves. With any luck, you've got all the stuff around the edge with the razor blade. So just be careful not to push anything towards the edge. Try to get right down in the fly cuts in case anything got stuck down in them. And I'll take a little compressed air around the edge, blow the grease out, there is anything that was around there, it should have blown it out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the crank and go down. Do not go up. If you go down, anything that was there should be left behind. And I see grease, but I don't see any chunks. Looks pretty good. So that little trick works pretty good. And I'll just wipe out as much of the grease as I can. I can go down a little further and try that again. Maybe a second blast of air. Of course there was grease on the end of that. I'm not trying to dry out the cylinder walls because I just freshly honed these and I don't want to dry them out and let them rust. So that little film of grease that's left on there, I'm just going to leave it because these were coated in ATF and I don't think that little bit of grease is going to hurt anything. And there we have it. All 4 O-ring grooves are cut. All to 30 thousandths. So now we have to make sure there's no little pieces in any of those grooves. So go through with like a little pick or something and make sure that all the cuttings are out of the groove. And then we'll start inserting the wire. So now we've got our grooves all done. We've made sure I went through and cleaned out all the grooves. There's absolutely nothing in the grooves. I've cleaned my hands, I've cleaned my tools. You want a hammer that's either, it's got to be a plastic, no aluminum, no brass, no steel. Or here's our piece of 041 stainless steel wire. If you're doing a composite gasket, you use stainless steel wire. If you're doing an MLS gasket, then you do a copper wire. The tool comes with copper wire, assuming you were going to do a MLS gasket. But I'm sticking with a composite just because my surfaces aren't freshly machined, so I know this will seal better, and I'm going to stick with the stainless steel wire. I found cut off a piece at least a foot long. This is 0.41 diameter stainless steel, otherwise known as aircraft lock wire. And when you use cutters, you make like a pinched off cut, not a straight cut. So you'll take a file and cut it, and then take a file and file the end until it's nice and flat. You don't want like the little, your cutters are going to make a point like this. You don't want that. You want a nice blunt flat tip. I'm just going to start to tap this wire down in the groove. Doesn't take a lot of effort. But just keep tapping a little bit, and it's going to follow the groove. And if you make a mistake and you get a ridge or whatever in it, you get to start all over again. And you want to make sure you got the same protrusion all the way around. Just take your time. This is my second time doing it technically. This is the easy part. Not a lot of pressure. This is a pretty crappy old hammer, but it works. That's what I've got. I think it was my dad's hammer years ago. It used to have a rubber end on it, but the rubber deteriorated so much that it just literally fell off. But for what I need it for, it still works. So Sometimes you gotta pull on the other end of the wire here just to coax it into place and see how ambidextrous I can be. Doing pretty good. So when we get close to the end here, we want to make as tight of a seal as possible. And if we just snip it off, again, we get that nice V. And that's going to leave a passage for compression gases to escape through. So what we need to do is we need to find out exactly where our end needs to be. And I'm trying to leave, these are side snips by the way, they leave a nice, much nicer cut I found on the stainless wire, not your regular pliers, and I'm trying to get this cut as close as possible. It's pretty good. And I'm actually going to pull the wire back up a little bit. I found with the snips, I can just come in and pull up a little bit. And then I'm going to take a razor blade. It's nice hard metal. And I'm going to use it to protect the other wire and the block while I file the end of this smooth. And you can visualize it here. You want to get as tight of a seal as possible. You're always better to cut your wire a little bit long and then file it to fit, because if you cut it too short, you get to start all over again. I was told if you're using copper wire with an MLS gasket, you should file both wires, or both ends of the wire, on opposite 45, so when they overlap each other, there's no gap at all. But I'm not going with an MLS, so I'm going with the straight ends. Try to do your filing as square to the wire as possible. I'm just trying to check and see where I'm at. Make sure your razor blade or whatever stays in place. Be very careful not to cut yourself. I know it's normal to bleed a little bit when you're working on a DSM, but it's a little after 11 p.m. and my idea of fun is not spending it at the hospital needing stitches. I think I'm pretty close there. I need to file a little bit more. It is stainless wire, so it's not easy to file. It's very slow to cut. You can push this down. Extra light never hurts. I think I'm going to be pretty close. So I'm going to try to tap it down. It's not bad. I think that's a little bigger than I'd like to see, but I think it was my initial filing job on the other end. Let's give it another little tap. It's pretty good, but I'm not happy with that gap. So now I get to do it all over again. It's not my fitment, it's the filing of the initial starting end. It could have been closer. But that's how it goes in. I'm going to redo this. I'm not happy with that end. If I'm going to do this whole job, I want it to be as close as possible, and that's not close enough for my liking. Anyways, that's how it goes. I'm going to redo this, and I'll show you how it should look. I don't know how well you can see that on camera, but that one is not perfect, but that's better than the first one. Yeah, I went all the way around, tapped it in exactly the same. I did a better filing job on the start, and I think a slightly better filing job on the end. There's still a bit of a gap, and in a perfect world, it'd be filed so good that when you put them together, you almost don't see the gap. It's definitely way better. And we've got our 10 thousandths of protrusion from the block of the O-ring. These are fitting in there really nicely. I gotta figure out how I'm gonna get this one out of here to try and redo that gap. I'm struggling with that a little bit. And I'll continue on with the other two. So I just went and redid that one. Kind of got to get a pick underneath the edge and try to get underneath it, pry it out, try not to damage your O-ring groove, and get it out, put in a new one, and I got a much tighter fit. So it's not perfect yet, but I think that's close enough where it's not going to cause an issue. It's actually better than my second one. So hopefully on the next two, it'll be even better. I'm still an amateur at this, so on to the next one. And file your end nice and square. That was my mistake on the first one, I didn't do it square enough. And this filing process is all about having patience. Almost there. We're there. That's my best one yet. one is about as perfect as I think I can get. Last one. And I'll try to show you here. This is what I do to start my wire. Try not to file your block while you're doing that, but just trying to get a nice square end on the wire. And then once you've got it pretty flat, I just lightly go around the edge just to deburr it, because the filing does slightly burr the edge, and you don't want that. A nice smooth edge, but you don't want to round it over at all. That's pretty good. So, here goes nothing. Slow and gradual. Not hard hits, you don't want to deform the wire. So set it in the groove. And your wire should be nice and smooth all the way around. If you get any humps in it, start over again. And when you're using these little side snips, always the side that you want to keep, put it to the back side of them, because this side gives a slight angled cut, whereas this gives a nice square cut. Got to file it anyways after, but just to give you the best fighting chance. And I'm giving myself just a hair of overlap to file. This one's already pretty close. Square up that end a little bit. Got just a hair more. There. Just like that. And I know, I just get better every time. I should rip these all out and do them again. Nah, I'm good with this. This'll do. Give it one final tap around. That one is really good. Like, you can sort of feel it with your fingernail, but that's about it. A little too much light on the camera, but trust me, that one is really good. So that right there is how you O-ring your 4G63 block with the Isky, I think that's how you spell it, Racing 100 GRM block O-ringing tool. So this is the 100 GRM. It's for 3 1/8 to 3 3/4 inch bore diameters. If you're doing something like an LS or whatever, I believe you need the 200 or 300, whatever the model number is. It's the next size up. This actually worked out pretty good. One little nitpick, I did have an issue with the carbide tool in it at first. There was a tiny little nick in the bottom of the tool and it didn't want to start cutting on the test piece that I did. So a quick little grind fixed that up, and then it worked perfectly after that. But you know, maybe they put it together on a Friday afternoon, I don't know, or a Monday morning. But you know, 2 seconds I touched up the blade and it worked perfect. Those are all sitting in there nice. Now I'll get my head back on and get this back in the car and throw some boost at it and see what it'll do. Thanks for checking this out, and we'll see you when we get some boost.